So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 50-something podcast with me, Andy Barlow, aged 57. I'm joined today by Benita Matofska, and if you'd like to introduce yourself, Ben, am I allowed to call you Ben on air?
You can call me Ben on air.
Cool.
And I'm 57, technically 3 months younger than you are.
This makes me feel
Can't
very
you tell?
old. And we've known each other since our early 20s and lost touch for 20-odd years, 30 years probably. I was reminded of you. We'll come back to the point of this conversation, but I was reminded of you when I was talking to a friend of mine who was telling me about this great friend of his who lives in New York, and he was telling me, and he got this record company, and he was a really cool guy. I was going, I know this guy, I know him. And it turns out there was a mutual friend, and whose name escapes me now.
Morris Bernstein.
Morris Bernstein.
Of Giant Step Records.
Of Giant Step Records, indeed. And I thought, blimey, I've not spoken to Benita and Lee, Benita's husband, for years. In fact, the last time I tried to speak to them, it was 9/11, and I tried desperately to get in touch, and they didn't contact me back, and I thought they were dead. So
that was mainly because there was no telecommunication, strangely enough, given that there was a terrorist attack on the city. So that's why you didn't hear back from me.
I know. And since then, though...
Don't take it personally.
So I don't take it personally. I don't take anything personally these days. That's the thing about being in your 50s, is that you get a bit more thick-skinned.
You do. And you just can't take things personally, let's face it.
That's true.
It's not worth it. Life's too short.
Life is too short. But that in itself is a pretty good starting point for this conversation. You've done loads. Well, we've both done loads. Most people do loads, in actual fact, even if you don't think you've done an awful lot. I think everything that we do, whether it's something to do with your family, or bringing up a family, or whatever, it is relevant. We are all relevant as we get older, and we only get more relevant, in actual fact, because of the experiences that we've had. Now, just without going into hundreds of depths of detail.
I was going to say, how long have you got?
Yeah, exactly. You've got about 10 minutes. What have you been up to? What have you been up to for the last 30 years, Ben?
Goodness, well, I've been living in New York for 8 years, running a production company, working for the BBC, set up another production company back in the UK, then left TV to go and do something more meaningful with my life. And I think that's one of the things about being in your 50s is you really want to have some kind of purpose. You get to that point where you're like, what's this really all about?
Yeah.
And actually wanting to give back and wanting to leave some kind of a legacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just how many TV shows did I make. But
and we will get onto this, but you have a book out.
I do.
That is called Generation Share. And I would like us just to delve into that, briefly. We don't need to go into too much detail, but I've had a look. I bought the book, you'll be pleased to hear. And it's fascinating. Actually, I don't think I realised how many opportunities there were to share, if you know what I mean. I always thought it was a bit hippy drippy, and then I've looked at your book,
and many others,
and it's actually really cool.
It's really cool. Well, the idea of the book was to showcase really positive stories of people all over the world. I call them change makers, who are doing something really good for people, for community, for the planet, for the environment, for society as a whole, and really making a difference. And these are ordinary people.
Yeah.
Ordinary people who have started something. Many of them entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, innovators.
Yeah.
And I wanted to showcase these positive stories to show that it is possible. But I also wanted to look at how we are creating a different kind of society.
Yeah.
And when we start to look at how we can share resources. So a sharing economy is essentially a system to live by. It's where we care for people and planet, and we share whatever's available to us in any way that we can.
So just for those of us who aren't genned up on this, quick 20 seconds on what actually a sharing economy is. What does that mean in layman's terms to people who perhaps have heard the phrase but don't really understand it?
It's really simply about sharing the resources that we've got. So just to give you one example, a third of our food is wasted for no good reason. Perfectly good food goes to landfill.
Mm-hmm.
With that third of that food, that 33.3% of food, we have enough food to feed anybody who is living in food poverty or who's hungry about 10 times over.
And have you found businesses and agencies and people who are actually dealing with that problem?
Exactly. So you've got a fantastic business called Olio, and what they do is if you've got, for example, you're going away on holiday, you've got stuff that you don't need, it might go off in your fridge, you go onto the app, you post whatever it is, and people come to your door and collect it. And it's a way of losing that waste, because all waste is resource in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So it's really tackling that problem.
Yeah. So housing issues.
Again, homelessness.
Yeah.
There is no need for anybody to be without a home.
Yeah.
No need at all. There are so many vacant homes just in the UK alone.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of empty buildings.
Yeah.
Perfectly good empty buildings that are perfectly habitable. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is not, do we have the resource? We've got the resource. What we need is the will and the people to drive that change. It's about behaviour change.
So what barriers are there to dealing with these kinds
So the biggest barrier is trust.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, I'm not going to share something with you unless I trust you.
Yeah.
So first you trust and then you share.
But is there a kind of a commercial angle? Because people generally do things because they want to make money.
Generally do things because they want to make money. So one of the things that we find in the sharing economy is that people are more likely to share resource.
So would you say something like Airbnb is sharing economy?
Airbnb certainly, and other car sharing, Zipcar, those kind of platforms and apps have been considered as the sharing economy. Yeah. But actually the sharing economy is much broader than that because it also includes charities. It also includes, for example, in the book, I've got a story of a girl called Arti Naik living in the slums of Mumbai who wanted to make a difference, not just for her own life, which she ultimately didn't have any kind of future. She would have been living a life of being sex trafficked or married by the time she was 11. So she wanted to make a difference. And what she did was she found a way of, she looked for books on the street. She taught herself how to speak Hindi, how to speak English, how to read, how to write. And then she taught others and she invited other girls into her slum home. So she shared the minimal resource that she had, a one-room slum home where there were 9 family members living, and her mum supported her. And now she has this schoolhouse still in the slum, which is the largest slum in Mumbai, where every day hundreds of girls are getting a hot meal and they're getting an education. Amazing. So she shared what she had in order to transform not just her life, but give opportunities for others.
So how did you find out about all of these people?
Well, in Artie's
case, there are a lot in the book. That's 200. The other thing that really surprised me. You know, I thought it was, to be honest, when I first thought I'm going to have a look at this book, and you know, I know Benita, I'll have a read, and I thought, how can I put this? I thought it might be a bit worthy, and a bit, like I say, a bit hippie. I was really surprised. There's some amazing stories, but these are really good stories, and there are, like you say, 200 stories. And I thought it'd be a slim volume. I thought it'd be something that you would find in your local vegan restaurant. It's fairly mainstream, good, great piece of writing. You know, great piece of journalism.
Thank you, Andy. I'll take that compliment.
Take it.
So, how did I find some of the people? Well, in Artie's case, she contacted me via LinkedIn. Extraordinary. Oh, wow. I ran a crowdfunding campaign via Kickstarter to raise funds for the book, because part of the idea was to do everything through sharing, to kind of live the ethos of the book.
Yeah.
And I worked with an incredible photographer, Sophie Scheinwald. So it's a book that is very visual,
beautifully
visual storybook that actually really brings these stories to life.
Yeah.
And really encapsulates what they're all about in a very kind of human way.
Yeah.
And Artie saw this campaign on social media and she sent me a message via LinkedIn. And that in itself is extraordinary. The fact that this girl in the slums in Mumbai, thousands of miles away from where I live in Brighton, had contacted me and connected with this idea. And she asked me, she said, I am Generation Share. Will you come to India and tell my story? And frankly, at that point, there was no budget to do any of that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's what credit cards are for, because ultimately I had to go.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I tried to do with the book And just in terms of how this is kind of really relevant to being in your 50s, one of the things that I wanted to look at was demographics.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to better understand, are you more likely to share because you're of a certain age, are from a certain background, you have a certain economic status?
Mm-hmm.
Is it about being rich or poor or wealthy? Is it about disability? Is it about gender? I wanted to look at all of these different demographics. And age was really interesting. And I think one of the things that's interesting about being in your 50s is that, so over 50% of startups, of entrepreneurs, are people like us in their 50s. And one of the things that's really interesting is when you start to look at innovation, is the amount of innovation that is happening amongst our generation. We brought the internet. We are responsible for that. You start to look at some of those big Silicon Valley tech founders, people in their 50s. So you look at the change that we've brought on the world, and now that change has propelled a whole other realm of change. And so I think that's really interesting. And for me, this whole idea of being in your 50s, wanting to make a change in the world,
So
whilst changes are happening to you.
Brilliant. Right, okay. Park that for a minute. But what I just want to come back to is, so you decided to make this change. Yes, the theme of this conversation is clearly around change. Yeah, we talked earlier, and to be fair, listeners, Benita did say, I'm not here to plug my book. I don't want to. It's not about that. It's not about selling something. She was very keen to have a conversation about aging, and about change, and about the changes that we go through and where we are in our 50s. So what I think is really important to this conversation is, you were telling us earlier that, you know, you were in New York, you worked for the BBC, you had 2 production companies, and then at some point you went, no, I want to change. I want to do something else. I want to do something that's going to make a difference. I want a legacy, and something that is going to be relevant to society. What was the catalyst for you to want to make that change? And then how did you, because it's quite a dramatic change to go from successful production company, and I know you're super driven, but it's quite a step from going from that Benita to this other one. So catalyst, how'd you get there? Over to you.
So I was working in television, and I was getting increasingly frustrated. TV is a bubble, and you spend time with people who don't even know the price of a pint of milk. And it was driving me nuts, because what happens is, the more and more successful you are, you make a show that wins awards, that wins all these accolades, that gets all these viewers. And actually what you're being asked for is more of that, more of the same. It becomes incredibly formulaic, which is dull. It's dull, dull, dull. I'm a creative person. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. That's just really boring, frankly. But also, what's it all about? What's it for? If I'm just making something that it's patronizing to audiences, it's really, frankly, often insulting to audiences, but there's no real meaning to it.
So you're talking about like the dumbing down of
TV, you know, formulaic. I mean, I worked in the kind of early stages when this whole reality TV genre was happening. Arguably, The Big Trip, which was a show that I made for the BBC, was one of the first reality TV shows, following 3 students on their trip across the US. And that's all well and good, and reality TV is a whole genre. We can have a whole other conversation about that, which is not what we're here to do. But it just became really meaningless for me. And the crisis point came when we've been developing, we were a preferred supplier of Channel 4. I had a meeting with a senior commissioner, whose name I'm not going to mention, obviously. And we'd been asked to develop something around teenage pregnancy. We had a really interesting story. And actually, I was told if I found an 11-year-old dad, then that person would commission it.
Wow.
And many executive producers in my position would have gone and found the 11-year-old dad.
Wow.
They would have found a way to find, perhaps even fabricate the 11-year-old dad. But the point is that I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I just, it was that moment, I just thought, I cannot do this anymore. My heart and my soul is not here anymore.
How
I
old
actually
were
want to
you when
make
you
a
made this
difference.
decision?
So I was, at that point, I was in my 40s. I was
Okay.
heading towards my later 40s.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was in sort of 2008.
Yeah. Because I do wonder if you'd have been in your early 30s, you may have gone and looked for the 11-year-old dad, because you were under that pressure, that scrutiny of your employers to deliver what they think was right for the audience, whether you agreed with it or not. And I just wonder if younger people feel pressured, whereas while, just spinning this back to the 50 somethings, we are now, we've kind of gone through things, we've gone through life, we've done things that we didn't necessarily believe in necessarily sometimes, but try not to, but sometimes. And we're now at that point in our lives where we give ourselves the permission to say yes or no, or to actually say, I don't believe in this and I want to do something else, and not feel like, oh my God, I'm going to miss out the next rung on the ladder,
I definitely believe that there's a point in that early part of your career where you're enthusiastic, you're excited, you want to get on that ladder, you want to climb that ladder, you want to do well, you want to succeed. And perhaps that specifically is what's driving you. And very often in this society, it is about money. Often that is the key driver for people. You're working your way up that ladder. And it's all very, frankly, working in that TV industry, it's all very exciting. It's really exciting. It's really, I got to travel the world. I worked on Rough Guides and Reportage and all of these amazing shows that took me into people's lives. I got to meet all sorts of extraordinary people that I wouldn't have ever had necessarily the reason to do that. But there is a point, as you say, where you get into your older, the older stages, and you're just, is this what it's all about? And I think for me, that was a real moment. And the other real moment was around that 2008 time of recession where,
I remember it well.
The economy just fell out. I mean, it was just, it hit everybody in so many different ways. I was running a production company, or as a freelancer, it impacted everybody financially.
I lost a design agency in 2009,
Right.
exactly.
So, and that's the point where you start to re-examining what is it that you're currently doing, and you start to think about your own sustainability and what is it that I want to be doing in the future. If that's gone, if that's disappeared, if that's not working anymore, and actually I'm really miserable doing it, because I've always been a person that believes, do what you're passionate about, do what makes a difference. Life is too short. Do the things that you care about, that you love. Why do people get stuck in these jobs that they hate?
Yeah.
And then the longer they're stuck, the more they hate, and it's just, you're in a vicious cycle.
So this was your catalyst for change.
This was my catalyst for change.
Yeah.
And I wanted something completely different. But of course, the idea of completely changing industries and sectors, well, where do you begin? So I naively thought I wanted to go and work in the charity sector, but I naively thought, do you know what? I love dogs. I've always had rescue dogs. I'm going to fill in an application form for head of communications at the Dogs Trust. And of course they're going to want me. I've worked for the BBC. I've done this for 20 years. Who wouldn't? And of course I didn't even get an interview. Because what you start to realise is that, first of all, I didn't even have the language. I'm a linguist and a writer, but the charity sector has its own language. It's like, learning a Japanese or something. And so that was a real learning experience. And one day I was kind of online and I stumbled across this day program that you had to apply for, which was called Making the Leap. And it was a recruitment agency, not NFP recruiting, lovely, lovely people that run the organisation. And they were offering this day where people from the private sector could actually meet recruiters from the charity sector. They could meet organisations that had current roles that they were recruiting for, and they were specifically looking beyond their own sector. So they wanted people who had different kinds of experience. And I went along to that day. I met someone that was recruiting for a role. I applied for it. The job was Head of Global Entrepreneurship at Enterprise UK. I didn't even know what the title meant, but it sounded interesting. And I went for it and I got the job.
Amazing.
And that was really transformative. And I knew that I didn't want to necessarily remain in the charity sector, but I wanted to get that experience to be able to then launch my own thing that had some kind of social impact.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really, for me, the way that I made that leap. I had to learn super fast. I mean, I spent the first 2 weeks going to meetings, and what I realized was that people were having meetings about meetings about meetings, and it made absolutely no sense to me. You know, I came from a production background where you
Mm-hmm.
need to get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
It's bish, bash, bosh, and it's done.
Mm-hmm.
So the very idea that we're having conversations about it drove me nuts.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't work at this pace. And it was also interesting for the organisation because they're dealing with someone like, okay, what are we doing? We're doing launch event, right, bang, bim, bam, boy, who have we got? Get these speakers in. This is it. It's organised and it's done.
Yeah.
Be like, what, you've done that already? You know, they would have had 12 meetings before, you know, anything happened. So it was a real learning curve, very, very steep learning curve. But I loved it because it was much more about making a difference. And I've never, in fact, been somebody who's been driven by money. So I grew up in a family and a household that was all about charity and community. And my parents were constantly on various committees raising money for all manner of causes.
Mm-hmm.
My mum was always putting on fashion shows for cancer research or Age UK or whoever it might be. And I somehow get involved in those projects. So, you know, at the age of 8, I ran a little jumble sale with my brother. And I was literally stopping cars in the street, waving flags to actually stop and say, come on, you've got to, and they're not going to run over an 8-year-old girl that's standing in the middle of the street waving. And they would stop and they would come. And then, of course, I had them. They had to buy something at my stall. And, you know, whether that was lemonade for 10p or whatever it might be.
I can just see that.
So, you know, for me, the driver I'm very, very entrepreneurial, but I would always describe myself as a social entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because I want to have impact with everything that I do.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to anybody else who wanted to change their career direction? I mean, we've all, you know, I've done it. We've all kind of done it. Lots of people have done it in our age bracket, where we've thought, you know what, I'm fed up of working for the man. I'm fed up of, you know, doing the same thing, going to work, having to wear a suit, doing all that kind of stuff. But actually, it terrifies me. I'm scared to death because I've got a mortgage to pay still. You know, I've got kids at university, or, you know, how do I provide and how do I make that leap? Because it's daunting. What advice could you possibly offer?
It is daunting. I would say that the hardest aspect of it is making the decision to do it.
Yeah.
The hardest aspect is making that first decision. But actually, if you have an idea, if you've got an idea for something, you've done your research, you've got to do your research. You've identified that there is a need for that product or that service or whatever it is that might be, that there is some kind of a gap, and you know how to fill that gap. You've got an idea. There are plenty of organisations that can help you to develop those ideas. I worked with an organisation called Unlimited, which is the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs. And what they do is they provide small grants for individuals who are wanting to start something that's going to have some kind of positive impact. And they're a great organisation, but they don't just give you money. They also provide all the network and the support and the mentorship.
So I imagine that is the most daunting thing as well. Well, not the most daunting thing is always going to be, am I going to be able to afford to live? Once you've got over that and you've kind of worked out a plan of how you might do that, then it's, what other support do I need? And it's not just speaking to your partner or speaking to your friend in the pub who will go, yeah, Andy, great idea, you go and do that. And, you know, when it all goes wrong, go, oh, sorry, mate, you know, that isn't what you want. You want that support, of course you do, but you want some actual technical support, some resource support, some other way of actually somebody helping you to achieve something, achieve your change.
And actually I did 11 different accelerator programs. I became obsessed with doing these accelerator programs. And accelerator programs, essentially what they do is they support, many of these were specifically aimed at social entrepreneurs and people that want to have some kind of impact. But you apply to these accelerator programs, there are thousands and thousands of them online.
What's an accelerator
So
program?
essentially, typically they may be for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, period of time, and you are with a group of people and you have sessions where you learn about business development, marketing, all of the different elements, financial, all of the different elements and the different aspects of running a business, of running your own business, of making an idea happen.
Right.
That's what they do. They provide that support, and they put you and they'll match you with potential investors. So you learn how to pitch ideas. You're put in rooms with investors. I mean, I had an extraordinary time, mostly when I was in my 40s, where I got onto one accelerator program called Black Box, where it was a Google sponsored program who identified that my company was one of the next best things. And I found myself in Silicon Valley, pitching to venture capitalists. It was the most bizarre experience of my and staying in a hacker house. And I have to tell you, at that time, all the other people were about half my age. So I was the only mum in the group,
Right.
and I was a complete anomaly. And people
And
were
how
like,
did you
"This is
feel-
amazing! You're doing this."
Did you? Because I mean, that's quite a brave move. Did you? I'm asking you. Of course not. But did you feel at all intimidated, being the only mum in the room? Because you do. We've had people email in who have said, there was one woman in particular who said, she was talking, we'd mentioned in one of the episodes about the menopause, and she'd said, do you know what it's like to be on a board and have a hot flush and have to get up and leave the room, to the giggles of the men in the room who go, oh, she's a woman of that particular age, and you just kind of, how humiliating that is. Did you ever come across anything like that? Is that,
There's gender prejudice everywhere.
Yeah.
There's gender prejudice everywhere, and I definitely had my fair share of it. I'll say, actually, interestingly, some of the worst prejudice that I had was when I was a young director working in TV, where always a male cameraman, and I would rock up, and I was really organised and together, and I knew exactly what I wanted. But the assumption that was made is, oh, she's a young girl, she doesn't have any technical understanding whatsoever, she's got no idea what she's doing. That was the assumption, that was the starting point. And people would patronise the hell out of me, or just try to embarrass me or say something, awful sexism, absolute awful sexism. So I definitely had it at that stage of my career. And then I think as I've got older, certainly you get yourself, but now and even there back then, I will always have some kind of comeback, because it's not okay. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about what's happening now is there's so much more awareness about menopause. There's a lot of these taboos of age have been broken, and we are much more likely to have those conversations. I was giving a talk at a very large international insurance company a few weeks ago, and they were talking about how they've been running these cafes, these menopause cafes, and they're in a very male environment, global insurance company, but they have been doing a very, very big recruitment drive in terms of getting it there, gender pay. They've been tackling a lot of these issues. But there's just a lot more awareness around now about how we look after our employees, about diversity and equity and inclusion, and a kind of understanding that, we live in a really challenging world, and we have the really complex problems like climate change and cost of living crisis and all of these challenges. And the only way that we can solve them as businesses, as communities, is by being inclusive, because we need people from all backgrounds and all genders and all areas of life in order to be able to solve these problems, because the problems are really tough, they're really challenging. And if everybody that's solving those problems looks exactly the same, we're going to have the same results.
That is very true. And I know, and again, we have touched on this in earlier episodes, but we're kind of shifting the focus a little bit with this new season, in season 2 of the 50-something podcast. And I wonder if, things are changing, but as a 50-something white male, and I'm the stereotype older guy in the boardroom, and who, the dinosaur in the room may be seen as, I don't feel that way. I feel still 20-something, and my brain's still active. I'm still, creative. And how would you? I mean, I'm not looking. We can't advise anybody ever. But if you were to say to somebody like me, who was maybe kind of going, I'm feeling old. I'm a creative. I'm a director, and I'm going to work at the BBC or Channel 4 or whatever, and everybody around me is young and hip and cool and come to work on skateboards, and and I just feel really old. What advice could you possibly offer to somebody in that situation, male or female, who may be feeling that the age agenda isn't being there's an imbalance for them? They feel old. How do you challenge that?
I think it's all about valuing yourself, first of all. I think we have to start recognizing that what we bring, the value that we bring as 50 somethings to the table.
Yeah.
We have this immense life experience. We have interesting journeys in terms of our careers. We have all sorts of skills that we've developed along the way. But most importantly, I would say, is we've done a lot of problem solving in our time. And I think as a 50 something, we are like the ultimate problem solvers, because we've done it so many times. And people in their 20s and 30s, they haven't had as many problems to solve as we have. It's just a sheer amount of time, volume of, so I think it starts with how we value ourselves. And when I was in that situation of being in a hacker house with all these 20 somethings, and I don't have a tech background, but I did manage to somehow run a technology company, and I was in I was in Silicon Valley with all these geeks. It was quite extraordinary experience. But I could have said, oh my goodness, this is really intimidating, it's terrifying, all these people know much more than I do. But actually, it's just facts, it's just stuff, it's just knowledge. And we are creative beings. And actually, we can apply those skills that we have, those transferable skills that we have, to learn this new stuff. I believe, our brains are infinitely adaptable and malleable. And it's really more about attitude and mindset.
100%.
And one of the things that I love about being 57 is the fact that I've got all this life experience that, if someone comes to me and asks me a question, I've got so many different places that I can kind of draw from. Oh, well, this happened to me, and it could be eons ago. But I've got so much to draw from. And when you're younger, you don't have as much, kind of in your bag of tools, so to speak.
No, that's true. Listen, Ben, we come to the end of our 30 minutes because we're trying to keep this kind of tighter. That was brilliant. Really insightful. Some great ideas. Love your book. The book is called Generation Share.
And it's available. If you're going to buy it, please buy it from bookshop.org.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it supports all the independent publishers.
Yeah.
And most importantly, independent bookstores rather. But most importantly, every single copy feeds and educates a girl in the slum in Mumbai.
Amazing.
So we support Artie's project. It also plants a tree through the Eden Reforestation Project. And it's all made completely ethically with organic inks. Everybody was fairly paid apart from myself and Sophie, who put the book together. But ultimately, you're doing something positive. You are sharing by buying the book. It's a non-profit initiative, ultimately. And we're on this mission to educate, feed and educate 4,000 girls in the slums and plant 4,000 trees. And we're over 3,000. So a few more copies, we'll get there.
Awesome. Benita Matofska, I'm Andy Barlow. I'm 57 years old. How old are you again?
I'm 57, but I'm 3 months younger than you are. And don't forget it.
That's good enough to end on. You're listening to the 50 Something Podcast.